Welcome to Deuteronomy. The title of this book, Deuteronomy, means the second law. Now, it's not actually a second law. The law has already been given, but it is a repetition of the law. It's a repeat, a recapitulation. So second law really refers to the fact that this book is the book where Moses reminds the people of God of the covenant they have with God, who God is, and their relationship to him. So don't be perplexed by the fact that they can feel like repetition of laws and rules and the Ten Commandments. That's deliberate. It's deliberate because this belongs at the end of the 40-year period of the wilderness wandering. So we've received the law. A generation is dying out in the wilderness, and now as they prepare to enter the land, this is what Moses sets in place as a reminder of what they have been called to, this holiness law, the law of God. So the book of Deuteronomy will bring us to the end of the wilderness time and prepare them for a new chapter in their lives as the people of God. And when you read a new chapter, it's good to be reminded of the chapter that went before, reminded of the place in history where you are. And that's clearly what we find here in Deuteronomy. It is a reminder of them, of the law that they have received from God. We've come across the word covenant before, so look out for the word covenant as you read the book. But the whole book is really a book of covenant. So when we've considered the word covenant, we've been reminded that's a word that describes a binding promise, a relationship between two nations, for example, or between two people. Now, the covenant form of Deuteronomy, and the textbook just hints at this, follows the pattern of ancient Near Eastern law treaties. Now, you may ignore that particular point, but it is really interesting. And it's interesting to think that there was a style of covenant in the ancient Near East 3,500 years ago. And that style is exactly what we find in Deuteronomy. Now, if it had been written many hundreds of years later, it would have looked different. Treaties changed in their style. But the covenant treaty of Deuteronomy is exactly what we would expect of 3,500 years ago. If you want to read more about that, you'll need to go into some more detail, a book like Kenneth Kitchen on the reliability of the Old Testament. Ken Kitchen was a real scholar of Egyptology in this period. And he looks at the context of the ancient Near East and shows you many, many ways in which we can see Deuteronomy parallels how they did these covenants, these binding agreements between nations in the ancient Near East. So a book like Ken Kitchen's on the reliability of the Old Testament, you'd find really useful to take that further. But here we are in Deuteronomy. We've got the textbook, and if you want to get on with reading Deuteronomy, there's a great little reading plan on page 48. So there's 25 days to read through Deuteronomy. You will notice some repetition. When you get to chapter 5, the Ten Commandments are repeated, and in chapter 6, this is very significant, because here in chapter 6, verse 4, we have what we call in Hebrew the Shema. That means hear. It's the Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God. And so from Deuteronomy chapter 6 verse 4, we have this great account of the binding promise between people and their God, which will be repeated in Jewish history and in Jewish culture. So many Jews will recite this passage day after day in their lives and remember it off by heart. So it's worth pausing to reflect on the significance of these words as you read them through. And Deuteronomy as a whole is the most quoted book in the New Testament, and that's significant. Jesus frequently quotes from the book of Deuteronomy. So that will reinforce to us the importance of this as a book to prepare us background for the New Testament. It brings us through, of course, to the death of Moses. That's the close of Deuteronomy. And the death of Moses includes an account of his burial and the account of his view of the Holy Land before his death. He's on Mount Pisgah in modern-day Jordan, looking across the land of Israel. And from that place, as a 120-year-old, he won't get to set foot in the Holy Land, not at this time. But before he dies, he does get a view, not of the land as it is, but as a view of the land as it will be, because it's described in terms of the tribal allotments. Now, that won't happen until the book of Joshua and then the conquest. So the land will become the land of Israel, not just the land of Canaan. And Moses, with that 120-year-old eyesight, is able to see the land as it will be. So it's a beautiful account of this closing of the period of Moses, and it's a handover, and of course the handover will be to Joshua, and we enter a new stage of biblical history. But do enjoy the book of Deuteronomy, and take notes of some of the details of the laws and rules and so on. We're going to do an extra video on the nature of the law. So that'll be a short overview of how we should understand the law in relation to the New Testament and as Christians. That's a very important topic, so you'll look out for that on a separate short video, and we'll think through how the law relates to us as Christians, because it's different. In the light of Christ, Christ fulfills much of the law, and in the light of Christ, our relationship to the law has changed. So we're going to think that through. Particularly, you'll see that again when we get to the book of Matthew. And in the Gospel of Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount is the great interpretation of the law from Jesus himself. But for now, it's worth just reading it as it is. This is the people of God 3,500 years ago preparing to enter the land. And in these final preparations, here is the repeat of the law. The second law, the Sermon on the Law that Moses provides God's people with. So I'll be back next time with Joshua, but enjoy your studies in the book of Deuteronomy.